Right, sorry, just put the chat back on so I can subscribe here. So I'm just waiting for it to catch up. Right, okay. So we're going to look at a second verb now. And this is an ending which will be written as an epsilon omega verb. Now, they are very similar to the verbs that look like luo, except that they have an extra epsilon. And we're going to use the verb philo, which means to like or love. So it's likely that you'll have heard of that word. And philo, so things to do with that prefix on the start of our words means to like something. So philo. Now I have this epsilon, and when we take the stem has this what's known as a weak epsilon on it, and that actually affects what happens when we try to put the ending with the word. And we get something which is known as a contraction take place. And so what happens with a contraction is that when you get some vowels that come next to each other, they kind of morph into something. Okay. Some of them disappear, some of them change letter. So we're just going to look at what happens to the contractions, and then we have to sort of learn those contractions and learn to spot them. Okay, they're going to come up quite a bit over the course in terms of being able to understand how these work. So philo, first of all, it's given in the root as its uncontracted form. Okay, so this is known as an uncontracted form. Now, what that means is that you're never going to see that word written down in the Greek New Testament. Okay, it doesn't get written with the epsilon in it, because actually what happens if you take the stem, which is the first four letters, and you combine it with the omega part of the ending that you want, then the epsilon omega actually contracts into just an omega. So actually we end up with philo, which looks exactly the same as the luo, right? So that's just I like, okay, or I love. Should we go with I love, I think. Right, I love. So what's happened there is the epsilon omega has actually contracted into an omega. So I'll do that. That's supposed to be an arrow, by the way. Try and make a better arrow for you. Right, so the epsilon omega contracts into an omega. Right, so when you come down to the next one, when you do you love singular, then we have phil. Now we have an epsilon, and then we're trying to add an epsilon with it. And those two epsilons are just going to contract into one epsilon. So we actually end up with something that looks similar. All right. So far, no difference. Okay. The two epsilons just contract into an epsilon. And the same is going to happen for the next one. All right. So in the singular, this all looks relatively easy, and you're hopefully thinking, if only it was all just like that. So I have you love in the singular, and he, she, it loves. Okay. And in this particular case, the E and the epsilon again contract into an epsilon. All right. Right. Now, what happens when we get to the plural, though, is the contraction. Now we have an epsilon and an omega and an omicron. And that's going to actually turn into an extra epsilon is going to turn in there. and the epsilon is going to contract into this. So the E epsilon omicron is going to go into omicron upsilon. Right, so what does that look like? We're going to start with our fill, and then the epsilon is going to turn into the omicron and the upsilon. So it's going to look like this. It's going to have filamen. So notice that you've got this extra little upsilon here, which is different to what happens in Luo. It doesn't change the standard meaning of it. It's still we love. Okay, it's just that because the verb has this weak epsilon at the end of its stem, it turns this contraction. For lu ete, we have a slightly different thing that goes on. And here, the two epsilons actually contract into, for some reason, into an epsilon iota. Right, so what we're going to end up with is fil ete. So we have an epsilon iota. So you just need to be able to spot that. Again, it is the it doesn't change the meaning in terms of the standard meaning of the tense. It's just what happens with these particular types of verbs. And that's you love in the plural. And then finally, we've got loosin. And loosin just contracts, just the epsilon just disappears, it drops out. Okay. So in this case, sorry, not for luo, it's fil. So filusin, where they love. Okay, so we have really, probably speaking, it goes to that. Okay, so what we have is a sort of another set of endings, really, but they are very similar. And it's really just these two that you need to really pay attention to. Well, I suppose there's three that you have to pay attention to. My highlighter comes up. I'll highlight what I want you to note. So firstly, this one is different to its root form. So the way you'll see it in the book, we just said you see it with the epsilon in there, but you don't write it. And then you'll notice that these ones and these ones are a little bit different. Okay. Apart from that, they do exactly the same thing as what we've done already. So if you take a look at the second set of vocab that comes in chapter 2, there are 6 verbs which we can learn now. So we've got 9 like luo, we've got 6 that are like philo, and you can tell with the uncontracted form as the root as it's given that you have the epsilon omega verb, and so you need to translate them and write them accordingly. Okay. So if we go to any questions about that? Okay with that? If we are, then I'll give you a few questions to try. Go true or false this time. Okay. You've got some capital letters in there for some reason. We generally speaking don't write capital letters, but they've come up on this, so the way it's written out there. What I'll do is I'll just bring the verbs through for you again. I'll stop the recording so that you can have a go at doing them. Let me just pick it up first. Right, there we go. I'll stop the recording, and then you can have a go at doing those.